And we're on. Thank you, Bruce. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone who's here in person for our first live meeting in, I guess, 2 years now. Thank you for coming out, and for those of you out there in Cyberland, welcome to this latest in our series of live stream lectures. So without further ado, let me introduce John Buffington.
Thank you. This is the December 2021 regularly scheduled gathering of the Historical Society of Frankford. We've been doing this since 1905, getting together on a regularly scheduled basis. We had to suspend the live gatherings at the beginning of the pandemic, but a couple of my rather heroic fellow volunteers here at the Society figured out how to get us online, and we really are excited that we're back with both the live audience and the outreach to the rest of the world beyond the Delaware River. So we're glad you're with us. This will be the last meeting before March. We like to sit by our hearths in January and February, but we'll be back online again in March. We want everybody to know that. And don't forget us and come back, please, even if you're not in the habit fully of visiting with us periodically. It's the second Tuesday of the month in the temperate months, 8 months a year. So we'd like to have you here. Now, Santa Claus is often, oh, Santa Claus is here.
Hi, everybody.
Santa. Yes. Santa, you're welcome back.
Thank you.
We missed you.
I put on a little weight these 2 years.
Well, it looks good.
Cookies. I missed the cookies.
Looks good on how's Rudolph?
Rudolph's fine. We couldn't get the roof one, it's on the slant. We had to go over to the friends. Land over there.
Oh, I see. Now, that bit with Rudolph has always troubled me a little, because it seems to me that whole story about how the reindeer, the other reindeer, Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and all those guys, how they sort of abused him when he first arrived, if I understand correctly. You don't supervise your own reindeer?
No, Rudolph takes care of them.
I don't know. I think that kind of early abuse in the life of a young reindeer might cause some trauma. We should be looking into. Do you provide medical insurance?
Yes, man of life. Yes. And the helpers. They got a union,
Do they? I was going to ask you that. Whether your elves in the workshop were union.
Yes, and if you keep me up here in this hot outfit all this time, I don't know. I might have to get the union on.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Do they all have nice sleighs and reindeer crews like you do?
Well, we got one backup. And we hardly ever use it because we spend all year painting it and making it nice and shiny.
Like the Queen's carriage for the annual speech. Okay. Well, we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And I know you thought some of us were naughty because we hadn't signed up for our dues and gotten our bills paid.
Yes, but everybody's in the same boat.
That's true. And so next year, maybe we'll be a little better organized and be on top of things more so. So thank you for coming.
You're welcome. So I'd like to just leave this basket on the chair, and if you can dig in your pockets and help us out. We gotta feed the reindeers, you know.
Professor Brian Michael is our guest this evening. He's an economics teacher at Temple University. And his courses include the economy of sports and macroeconomics, which are two very interesting topics, I think. But he's also something of an entrepreneur, apparently, in other parts of his life. And he tells me he just finished his semester and is now, this is the first thing he has when he's been set loose. So we're glad to have him here. Appreciate his coming. We have a lot of history here in Frankfurt. That's why we have a historical society. We are very proud of all the stuff that we have, that Frankfurt has been important in the development of, including American religious freedom. William Penn, before Thomas Jefferson was doing it in Virginia, William Penn was doing it here. And also, we have, at the Society, we have the records of 4 of the very first 5 building and loan associations. We have the record book of the society that made the first American loan. So we've been very important. And the Frankfurt, there was a mill here, a Swedish mill, we think. So early that we are one of the first industrial sites in the Western Hemisphere. So we're very important with in the history of firsts in America. And tonight we're going to hear about another place where Frankfurt was important in an important cultural institution, professional football. So Professor Weicker.
Hello, good evening. Thank you everyone, thanks for being here. Thanks everyone for tuning in online as well. Thanks to Susan for putting this together. Richard, John, Jerry for the introductions, Vanessa as well, and all the volunteers and board members here at the Historical Society. I'm happy to be here as our first event in a long time, so that's exciting. So the plan for tonight, if you'll see, we'll do a couple quick introductions. Also with me tonight is Andrew Weicker, co-author of the book. So we'll do some introductions, myself and Andrew. We'll talk briefly about the background of the book, putting it together over the past year, the year during COVID. We'll get into some history of the Yellowjackets and a brief history of the Eagles as well. So we'll tell some stories, some anecdotes. We'll show some photos from the book, some photos that didn't make the cut for the book as well, and just kind of talk about the history of football here in Philadelphia, specifically in Frankfurt, through a couple stories. Then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. Certainly, if you have any additional stories you'd like to tell about the history here in Frankfurt, we'd love to hear it. And we'll also, of course, have copies of our book for sale. The books are $25, and tonight, any copies of the book sold will donate $10 to the Historical Society. So that's one thing off the bat, and we'll leave some copies too to continue that free as well. All right, so real quick, an introduction about myself in addition to what John mentioned. We should start, I guess, with my grandmother, who grew up in Wissonoming. She attended Frankfurt High School, class of 1940, and lived in Tacony most of her life. My mother did as well. I did for a little bit. So we do have some connections to the area. I grew up, though, mostly in Tarsdale, northeast section, far northeast. Went to Holy Ghost for high school and University of Pennsylvania, where I studied political science. I lived in DC for a couple of years working on digital campaigns, building websites, emails, fundraising for people trying to lobby Congress, charities, things like that. After 2-3 years, I moved to London for grad school. I went to the London School of Economics there, and then came back to DC for more political consulting, along with election consulting as well. So I did that for a while. All the while I was a Phillies fan, Eagles fan. I grew up here, of course, 4-4. And I started a website, Phillies Nation, that helped keep me in the loop with Phillies news while I was living in DC, because at the time, the Nationals weren't there yet. They would still be Expos, if you recall, Montreal and San Juan Expos at the time. So Phillies Nation really helped me get started in the sports industry, in addition to politics. That grew into several events and a television show. So eventually I moved back here to Philadelphia, to South Philly, where I live now. I also, around that same time, started a store that sells vintage sports apparel in Center City. It's called Shibe Vintage Sports on 13th and Walnut. So we sell a lot of things like this Yellowjacket shirt, old Kelly Green Eagles paraphernalia, merchandise, and we tell the story of these old teams and players and owners and games and things like that all the time. From there, I got into teaching at Drexel, Holy Family, where I met Andrew, and also Temple, where I am teaching now, and like I said, just finished an exam this morning. So I'm happy to be here again. I'll introduce Andrew and give him a couple minutes to talk.
Hello, I'm Andrew Weicker. I'm one of the co-authors of the Philadelphia Eagles history book. My background in Frankfurt, I was born and raised, still live on Cheltenham Avenue. Went and attended St. Bartholomew's Elementary School until that closed. Went to St. Matthew's School after that. I was planning on attending North Catholic for high school, but they closed their doors right before starting my freshman year. Spent 4 years at Father Judge High School and attended Holy Family University, where I got a degree in sports marketing and management, which is where I met Brian. And during my time at Father Judge and Holy Family, I started a Facebook page called Philadelphia Eagles Frenzy, just as a way to talk to more Eagles fans and discuss the team. And over the years, that page has grown to over 150,000 fans. And in that process, I decided to start a website as well, eaglesfrenzy.com. And with all that, I help promote stores like Brian's store in Center City to help sell merchandise for the team. Brian approached me to write this book with him, and it's been a pleasure just looking back through the history of the team and finding out how rich of a history football is in Philadelphia, and particularly in Frankfurt. I'll hand the mic back to Brian, and we'll get more into our background of our book.
Okay, thank you. My dad, Andrew, was one of my best students, right? So a natural choice to help with the book. So, as I mentioned, I own a store, Shibe Vintage Sports, and we actually sell a lot of these kind of books, the Arcadia-style books for the Phillies, for the Philadelphia Athletics, for Connie Mack and Shibe Park. There's one for the Big Five, and I always wondered why wasn't there an Eagles one. So really, that's the kind of impetus behind it. We thought it would be a good idea. We thought it would be great for the store. We have a lot of connections in the sports industry, including one important one with Ray Didinger, who wrote the foreword for the book. So he was the first person we called when we decided to do this. He mentioned off the bat that we should contact Ed Mahan, the Eagles' first photographer, who contributed a lot of photos for his book. But we had a few unsuccessful attempts. We did find a lot of photos in the different archives around the city. The Temple Archives, for instance, had all of the Philadelphia Bulletin photos, so they're all available. And as a professor, I got a discount on them, which was great. But also different archives like Penn, the Hagley Museum down in Delaware, University of Nebraska, Philadelphia Archives, as well as Vincent Pally. But we came to the Historical Society knowing that we were going to do a chapter pre-Eagles on everything that occurred, before the Eagles, high school football, all the great college teams, and of course the Yellowjackets. So we came here, we contacted Brian, who wrote the Arcadia book on Frankfurt. He put us in touch with Susan, and you guys gracefully allowed me to come during COVID when you guys were otherwise shut down. We found a lot of original, never before seen photos. They were in great shape. I think we discovered they were from a local photographer named Will S. Gibson, who had a studio right here on Frankford Avenue. And you can see if any of the programs are out at some point, he has an ad in some of them. So it was great to find photos, but again, we were trying to locate the Eagles photographer, Edwin Hand. It turns out Susan knows him personally and was able to make a connection. So in addition to all of the great photos that we found here at the Society, she put us in touch with Ed, who had an additional treasure trove of photos, thousands of photos in his basement. He fortunately was able to pare it down for us, and through several trips, we were able to find quite a number of great, and again, never before seen photos that are included in the book. Additionally, Andrew has made a connection with Melissa Pios, the daughter of Pete Pios, and if you don't mind telling that story real quick, how she came to contribute to some of the books.
Yes, so with the Eagles Frenzy fan page, I would receive messages from all different fans, and one message from a few years ago was from Melissa Pihos, who is the daughter of Eagles great Pete Pihos. As a daughter of a Pro Football Hall of Famer, she gets to attend each induction ceremony every year, so she goes to Canton, Ohio. So she would share photos to me of her dad and other Eagles greats. And when we started researching the book and trying to find some photos, I reached back out to Melissa, and she was a great help in finding some rare pictures of her father and his Eagles teammates. And we ended up including a few of them in our book as well. And some background on Pete was he was called as a Greek, he was brought into the Eagles, and he came here after World War II. He served under George Patton, and was also a part of the D-Day invasion. After leaving there, he came to Philadelphia. He played a few years here and was one of the greatest tight ends in Eagles history. His number 35 is also relevant because he served in the 35th Infantry under George Patton. And after his time in Philadelphia, he retired, and eventually from his playing days, he developed Alzheimer's. So his daughter ended up doing a documentary on his progress from football and into his late stages of Alzheimer's. But Melissa was a great help with the book, and we appreciated her service for us, as well as Vince Papali and some of the other photographers we were able to get in contact with for the book. Brian will take back over, and we'll go more into some background with the Yellowjackets.
So here's a picture of Pete, one that Melissa was able to include for us. And soon after we contacted Melissa, someone reached out to her via Facebook from France, who found her father's dog tags on the beaches there. I don't know if it was quite Normandy or where it ended up. So just weeks later, this was last year, and she's in the process of going over to meet them and recover the dog tags. And I believe NFL Films is going to follow her and do a little piece on that as well. So look for that coming out soon, which is a really fascinating, incredible story as well. Like Andrew said, we have some players in addition to Vince Vitale. We also solicited fan photos, which was great through Andrew's website and Facebook page. Here's a picture of some fans in London a few years back, but we also have them from the Super Bowl and different points in Eagles history. So it's great to have some of these unique, again, never before seen photos. But let's talk for a little bit as we begin the history of professional football here in Philadelphia with the Yellowjackets. Obviously, they started here in Frankford, one of the first neighborhoods outside of Center City. So it's important to understand, I think, two things. One, the neighborhood of Frankford and how it developed the Yellowjackets, and two, Pennsylvania statewide blue laws, as we all remember and still deal with today to some degree. So both were pretty big in shaping the team. First up, Frankford, the Yellowjackets themselves were an outgrowth of the Frankford Historical Association, or Frankford Athletic Association, that was founded in 1899. They had teams for baseball, soccer, and football. It was a charitable organization, so any additional money that they made from membership dues and public dues, they would donate back to the neighborhood through water fountains. I think they donated a coal heater to the nursery here in town. So it was run as a charitable organization, not really as a professional football team like you saw some of the other teams like House's Bears or Marshall's Redskins or Mara's Giants in New York. So it was a neighborhood team to start. They played a lot of games. They played independent teams. They played colleges, local teams around here, and eventually NFL teams as well. You didn't have to specifically be an NFL team to play NFL teams in your schedule. So they played a lot of games in the season, usually over 16 games. So you had Frankfurt, mostly local folks, playing. This was around 1910, 1920s. Also, like I said, blue laws were an important part of the Yellowjackets founding, mainly because games were forbidden to be played on Sundays. So the Yellowjackets had to play all of their home games on Saturdays, which really gave them an extra day to schedule a second game on Sunday. And in fact, oftentimes, an away team would come here to Frankfurt, play a game. Both teams would travel back to the away team city to play a replay on Sunday. So again, they played a lot of games. This also got the Pottsville Maroons, which were a local rival in Pottsville. A lot of away teams, if they didn't play Frankfurt the next day, they would just hop another train over to Pottsville. So Pottsville had the advantage of getting beat up teams on Sunday that had just played the Yellowjackets on Saturday. So that kind of was the beginning of the Yellowjackets. They played on what was known, I believe, as Browns Field for a while, Worcester Field as well. They had to relocate when Frankfurt High School was built. And eventually they settled into Frankfurt Stadium around 1923. Attendance ranged anywhere from 10 to 15,000 people. It was regularly filled. They had some blimp shots, just like they do nowadays. Right? The Yellowjackets got their team name from the colors, which were in turn colors of the city flag, blue, white, and yellow, which in turn were colors of the Swedish flag, some of the original settlers here in the city. So that's how the Yellowjacket name came. As you can see, it was right in the neighborhood, right? The stadium was at Frankfurt and Devereux, and they played there from 1923 until their end, which we'll get to in a minute. So the team was made up, as I mentioned, mostly of local players. They were good. They were two-way players. It was about 14, 15-person roster. The game really resembled rugby at the time, right? 3 yards and a cloud of dust type of football. It wasn't the high-flying action we're used to seeing today with Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith. Right? Some players that you may have heard of, well, actually to start, As I said, it was mainly governed by committee, by the board of the association. So there wasn't, again, any owner. Shep Royal was the business manager of the team, later the president of the board as well. So he handled most of the affairs of the team in terms of scheduling, sponsorships, expenses, and things like that. So Shep Royal is someone important to remember. Also, Guy Chamberlain. Guy Chamberlain was brought to the team in 1925 to professionalize the squad. Right? They were an organic team, an outgrowth of the Athletics Association. They were looking to get better and more technical with practices. Guy Chamberlain essentially was a hired gun. He coached previously in Canton and Cleveland and won the championships with them. Right? So he came to the team out of the professionalism. He also played halfback as well and was pretty good at it. Additionally, some players, Link Lyman, an offensive lineman from Nebraska. He's a little more famous from playing with the Bears. Also, Hat Moran, who is familiar here at the Society. He's a left halfback from Carnegie Tech, or Carnegie Mellon now. There was a quote about Hat Moran that I read while researching some of the players, which I thought was pretty interesting. One of the sports writers at the time said, he was like a star let down from the planet Mars, with plays that the poor fish of the earth knew nothing about. We're certainly pleased to tell our many readers the wonderful addition this player has made to the team and the spirit he's put into the rest of the players. Right, so Hat Moran was a real fan favorite, also left halfback, scored a lot, popular player as well. I would like to mention 2 Bits Homan, short fella, 5'5", not much taller than me. Maybe I'm a little bit taller. But he was a quarterback, one of the smallest players to ever play. And he also is known, 2 Bits, for inventing the touchdown dance. Generally, like in rugby, players would put the ball down when they score a touchdown. He was the first to actually hold the ball, handshake to his players, shaking hands with the ref, and then he handed the ball to the ref. And that was what was known as the first touchdown dance for 2 Bits Homan. But you have quite the cast of characters and names like 2 Bits, Doc Bruder, Tex Hammer, Pie, Way, Jug Earp, Swede Youngstrom, Wookie Roberts, and Houston Stockton, who went to Gonzaga, and also the grandfather of basketball great John Stockton. He played here for the Yellowjackets out of college in Gonzaga. So a lot of good players that came, particularly in that 1926 season, in which they won the championship. So if you want to go to the next slide, some more just quickly on the history of the team. They joined the NFL in 1924. They were an immediate success. The NFL was looking to get a foothold on the East Coast. They previously had franchises in New York and Washington, and they never took. The NFL was mostly a Midwest league, Duluth, Green Bay, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Canton, Cleveland, right? So they were trying to get on the East Coast. They saw, again, this organic team who was really good in Frankfurt. They figured instead of trying to start a new franchise, let's invite the Yellowjackets to the NFL. So they did. 1924 was their first season, and they did well. Overall, the record was 17-3-1. League-wide, they were 11-2. If you tabulated the winning percentage like they do nowadays, they would have actually won the championship in 1924. But it didn't quite work that way. They came in 3rd place. Not a huge deal. 1925, they had a decent season again. They did not compete for the championship, but they did have a lot to do with the championship in 1925 NFL. They played the Pottsville Maroons. They beat them. Then, soon after, they were approached by a football promoter who said, we're going to have the best team in Pennsylvania, whoever wins between you, play an all-star team of Notre Dame players, so the 4 Horsemen. Right? We're going to play the game at Shibe Park, which holds 40,000 people. Make a lot of money. It'll be a great event. The Yellowjackets said, sure, we just beat Pottsville. We're going to do it again. Well, it turns out playing all those games came back to haunt them. They played their third game in 4 days and got thumped by the Maroons. So the Pottsville Maroons wound up being the Pennsylvania champions and were supposed to play the Notre Dame team. But the game was, again, at Shibe Park, which is in Philadelphia, and the Frankford Yellowjackets said, no way, that's our turf. They protested the league and said, you can't let them play this game here. They're taking away revenue from us. It's bad enough we have to play our games on Saturdays and compete against Penn with 100,000 person Franklin Field, or 60,000 person Franklin Field, Temple, who was good at the time, Lafayette, Penn State. This is too much. So the NFL told the Maroons, if you play this game, you forfeit the season. They played the game anyway. And the NFL took away their championship, took away their wins, and gave the 1925 title to the Chicago Cardinals. So it's something that was brought up later in the 60s. NFL owners voted to try to give the championship back. They voted against it. Ed Rendell tried again in 2003, I believe, and only the Pittsburgh and Philadelphia franchises voted in Pottsville's favor. So the Yellowjackets, while not, again, competing for the title that year, did have a lot to do with it. The following year, 1926, they did win the title. They steamrolled opposition. Ironically, the only loss that they had was to the Providence Steamrollers, but it was, again, one of those home-and-home games where they had to play them twice in one day. They lost a home game and then went up to Providence and beat them up there. So 1926, they were 14-1-1, 11 shutouts. They had 28 touchdowns to opponents' 6. So they were really good. Right? They really good. They won the championship. There was a rival team at the time, the AFL, the Philadelphia Quakers, who were playing down in Philadelphia Municipal Stadium, later known as JFK. So there was talk again of having some sort of citywide championship between the two teams, but that never actually happened. But the Yellowjackets, you know, they saw that competition there. The 1926 season was a success. 27, 28, they were still okay, but the veterans were getting older. By 1930, they went 4-13-1. The Great Depression really hit the team hard, dues, membership, scheduling, things like that. And then before the 1931 season, there was a fire at the Yellowjacket Stadium, which they really couldn't recover from. They had to play their home games at the Baker Bowl and Municipal Park, and again, never recovered. They tried to sell the team, but were unsuccessful. So the NFL bought the franchise back and the rights to the Philadelphia franchise in 1931. Waiting in the wings was Bert Bell from the main line, and he, with a loan from his wife, bought the Philadelphia rights, renamed the team the Philadelphia Eagles. Right? He wanted to be more inclusive with the entire city, not just the neighborhood. He also added the Eagles from Roosevelt's National Recovery Administration, a sign that he saw down on Chestnut Street, and that's how the Eagles were born. So we can talk a little bit about the Eagles. We have some photos real quick from Frankfurt, right? Here's some photos from fans. Maybe you know them, maybe these were your grandparents, great-grandparents. At the game, again, they were well attended. The Yellowjackets had a fan club. They attended road games. And they also had a band, if you saw that. The Legion Post 211 provided a drum and bugle corps for the games. So it was a real festive atmosphere there on Frankfurt Avenue, but it didn't last too long. So 1924 to 1931 was the Yellowjackets. Short, but great history. As I mentioned, there were a lot of other football games and teams in the area before the Eagles. Temple, Penn, Lafayette, Penn State all won national championships. John Heisman was coaching at Penn. Bob Warner was coaching at Temple. We had a lot of high school rivalries as well. You might have gone to a Thanksgiving game or two. Certainly Frankfurt versus North Catholic for 90 plus years, right? So the football was big in the city before the Eagles, and that was one of the themes of the book, that Philadelphia has always been a football town, but only recently has it become an Eagles town. And we'll get into that a little bit. So, as I mentioned, the Eagles kind of start with Burt Bell. Founded the team, right? He was one of the modern innovators of plenty of things. Television sharing, revenue sharing, player associations, right? The phrase "any given Sunday," having games on TV, having games on the radio, right? So there's a lot of stuff in the book that we talk about as well. He played at the University of Pennsylvania, and he was the first owner of the team. He hired Lev Ray to be the first coach, which we have in the book, but they weren't very successful. They had 10 losing seasons to start. I think the first game they lost 56-0 to the Giants, right? So it was off to a bad start. If we think nowadays, I guess we have it good with 10 losing seasons there. It took until 1943 with World War II and the introduction of the Steagles for the team to have their first winning season. The Pittsburgh Steelers did not have enough players, and at that point were owned by Lex Thompson. New owner, Burt Bell, had an ownership right with Pittsburgh. They were friends, the franchises, so they decided to join forces with the Rooneys out there in Pittsburgh. So they had the Steagles for 1 year because of World War II, and too many players were gone because of the draft. But the team finished 5-4-1. It was their first winning season. The team was dominated by players on the Eagles. They played most of their home games in Philadelphia, but they did share head coaches. Greasy Neal on the Eagles and Walt Kiesling for the Steelers, who ran the defense. They didn't get along at all, right? So the experiment kind of ended after that. Incidentally, the Steelers joined with the Cardinals the next year. They were terrible. Their mashup name was known as the Carpets, because teams walked all over them. Okay. So the Steagles were their first winning franchise. We talked about Lex Thompson, who was a new owner, and that was one of the interesting parts of the books. You know, a lot of us know the players, but getting to know the owners was really interesting. I felt over the years the Eagles have had just really interesting owners, just crazy, is putting it lightly. They all make Jeff Lurie look like the most boring man alive. He's really professionalized the team, and they've come a long way since some of these owners, and the stories, again, are all in the book. But once things got going, the Eagles were good. They made it to the NFC Championship in 1947. They lost to the Cardinals. In 1948, they went back. They won. Right? They won behind Steve Buren, right, running in the snow, shutout. The team was then sold to a new owner, actually new owners, known as the Happy 100, 100 investors who now own the team. Right? So if you can imagine, you know, one crazy owner, think of 100 crazy owners. So it's fairly dysfunctional at the time. However, the following year, 1949, they repeat with an NFL title, another shutout, a record that has not since been broken, 2 consecutive championship shutouts. So they were good. But again, they couldn't sustain that those wins, not until 1960, and Chuck Bednarik came around. Incidentally, this is a picture not included in the book, although it might be one of the most famous photos out there. It was really expensive. Right? It's owned by Getty Images now. We try to stay away from it, at least then, when it comes to archival images. So we wanted to keep it organic, fan-focused, accessible. But Chuck Bednarik, who was on that 1949 team, really bridged the gap between then and 1960. Another player who I found really interesting in the research, you may have heard of Bucko Kilroy, who was known as probably the dirtiest player in the NFL, both by his teammates and other players, and even by Life magazine. who mentioned it in a magazine article, right? So he actually sued them for libel and won a case. He won $11,000 because they called him one of the dirtiest players in the NFL. It was true. He certainly would admit to it. But he also later became known for starting the NFL Combine, one of the first scouts. He invented a lot of the scouting system to evaluate players and had a long, successful career in the Patriots front office. But again, I forgot to mention, of course, Bucko Kilroy first grew up in Port Richmond, went to North Catholic, went to Temple before he was drafted and started with the Eagles. So we have a good picture of him in there as well. So players like him, of course, Chuck Bednarik, owners like Jerry Woolman, right? We have a few pictures like this when you really see the meaning of the expression, a picture's worth 1,000 words. There's so many stories in this photo that tell about the history of the Eagles. First up, on the left, Coach Joe Charge, right, from Notre Dame. The Eagles signed him. New owner, Jerry Woolman from Shenandoah, a real rags to riches to rags story. A DC property developer who ended up losing it all, including the team. Signing Coach Kuchar to a 15-year contract after his first season coaching the Eagles. And then who's that in the middle? Does anyone know who that is in the middle? Ed Snyder, who was also vice president of the Eagles. Jerry Woolman was friends with Sol Snyder, Ed's father, and Ed was kind of an aimless young man with no direction. Jerry took him under his wing, gave him a job, gave him an ownership stake in the Flyers, which he also owned, the Spectrum, which he also owned. And then, as Jerry Woolman in his real estate development project was trying to build the Hancock Center out in Chicago, ended up making a mistake, losing a lot of money, essentially going bankrupt, and he needed to sell the Flyers in order to save the Eagles. He needed this, and Ed Snyder, as a thanks for all that mentorship and help, said, no thanks, I'm going to keep my share, and basically drove his mentor and friend, Jerry Woolman, bankrupt. They ended up never talking again. It was a real bad breakup. But of course, we all know Ed Snyder, who continued to own the Flyers, Spectrum, for many years after that. But it all began here with the Eagles. But again, Coach Charich was not a great coach. He didn't last his 15 years, to say the least. Fans held signs, Joe must go. They hung effigies from the top of Franklin Field. They burned them. They held pep rallies after the game. They flew planes above Franklin Field, all trying to get Joe Kuchar fired. And to the media and sports writers, he basically would just hold up his contract and said, I'm here 15 years, deal with me. There's nothing you can do. So that really even made things worse for players. This was also, we have a picture in the book, his last game, I believe it was December 26th, 1968, also known as the Snowballs at Santa game, right? So after all the losing seasons, Kuchar eventually got fired when Woolman had to sell the team to Leonard Toast, which is another good picture too. So all of those stories right in that one picture. This is another one, right? Leonard Toast, the owner who I mentioned, became the owner after Woolman. In the middle is Howard Cosell, right? This is a picture in the book. This, of course, Howard Cosell broadcasted the Monday Night Football games. So he was in town broadcasting a game. This was right around the time when the vet was being built. And in fact, the vet was supposed to be ready in 1970. It was delayed, but the NFL had already scheduled a Monday Night Football game, right? Getting ready for the vet, they were going to show it off, national stage, but of course it was delayed. So they had to play the game in Franklin Field, but it didn't have lights, right? So the Eagles had to chip in and buy lights for Franklin Field in 1970. Also, Leonard Toast, who was a notorious gambler, drinker, womanizer, charitable a bit as well, but certainly wealthy guy, they were pre-gaming, him and Howard Cosell. So much so that Howard Cosell was so drunk during this Monday Night Football game that he was removed from the broadcast at halftime. Right, so he couldn't hang with Eagles owner Leonard Toast, legendary drinker Howard Cosell. So again, great stories in these photos. You know, we tried to capture these anecdotes and stories all within 2-3 sentences. But the idea is hopefully they spark some interest and you can do some a little more research yourself, whether it's here, online, or wherever. So some more original photos. This one's we found from Ed, right? Of the 1980 team, you can tell on the right there is Ron Jaworski, right? And he was really the kind of glue that held that team together. And that's one of the great things talking to Ed and Ray and the different players. It's just kind of talking about how the teams were comprised, the chemistry, right? How the fact the 1980 team wasn't great, but they played well as a team, right? The 1960 team had talent, but heading into the season, the first couple of weeks, they were iffy. Then Bobby Walston hit this game-winning field goal against the Browns, and that really catapulted the Eagles to a stretch of victories, just like we saw in 2007 and the Eagles Super Bowl run, right, with the 61-yard Jake Elliott field goal. So we started to see a lot of similarities between players and teams, and chemistry, stories, Ron Jaworski and the relationship with Dick Vermeil, right, who just kind of coached himself to death, but had a great run in 1980. And all the players associated with that. Harold Carmichael, right, Mike Quick, players like that. And Buddy Ryan, of course, right after Leonard Toast took over the team, sold the team, Norman Raymond became the owner, and Buddy Ryan often referred to him as the man in France, if you recall, because of him always taking vacations in France and never actually being there. Buddy Ryan, of course, known for his defense, never really got the Eagles on the offensive side of things, but had some of the best defenses in the early 1990s. Also, during this time, Norman Raymond threatened to move the team to Phoenix. Right? If you recall, in the 1990s, there was potential that he would move the team. He needed money. He found some investors. And I believe it was Ray Dininger who broke the story. He mentions it in his memoirs, which were released in April. So, again, a lot of interesting stories, especially having to do with the owners. And like I said, Jeffrey Lurie and his era with Andy Reid, close but not quite, but a new level of professionalism for the team that we never saw, culminating, of course, with the Super Bowl. And we're really fortunate to have a lot of photos from the Super Bowl, Philly, Zach Ertz's diving catch, Brandon Graham's strip sack, right? A lot of fan photos from the time at the game or here in Philly at City Hall in South Philly and here in Mayfair, right? All over the place. It was a great time, and that was one of the best parts of capturing the stories in the book. So the final chapter was all fan photos, so if you have a chance to look at it, I think that's a great thing to look at the faces of the fans, and you can see over the years, really not much has changed, right? Like I said, people love football here in Philly, whether it's the Yellowjackets first, and now at the Eagles. It's been a great run, and we had a great time putting the book together. So if anyone has questions, I'm happy to take some questions. As I mentioned, we have the book for sale up front here. The book's $25. We're going to donate $10 for each book sold back to the museum. If you don't get one today, you can get them online at shibesports.com. We have them available there, as well as these Yellowjackets t-shirts. Make a great gift. And if you get the shirts online, use the code Frankford, and they're $25. So again, thank you everyone for attending here in person and online. be happy to answer any questions, whether about the books, Eagles, or if you want to share any stories about football that you have. Please let me know. Questions? Yes.
Would it make sense to have this somehow turned into something you have on a local TV channel, PBS channel, or something, or like a sports memorabilia, some cable channel, something like that? I don't know if it's like historical information you can have a lot of learning with a lot of people, but I'm wondering if you have it more accessible to people without making out the books as much as they are to actually have such a lot of discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see why not. We could do documentaries. We could do short vignettes online, a TV show. But that is one great part about the book. One, it's mostly photos, so you can kind of pick it up at any point, start reading it, and learn a few facts here or there. But yeah, I think whether through video form, this book, there are plenty of stories, and they're fun, they're interesting, and they have connection, like I said, whether it's players that played here at Frankfurt or North, or for Temple. Yeah, I definitely think that's something that we would be interested in doing as well. You know, one thing we would just have to get rights, different kind of rights to use for photos on TV as opposed to in a book, but I think that is certainly something that could happen. You know, podcasts as well, telling the stories. You know, this, like I said, is a photo history book. Ray Didinger, of course, wrote the Eagles Encyclopedia. So if you want a full, fact-based, comprehensive history of the Eagles, Ray Didinger's book is certainly the way to go. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to slice up Eagles and Philly football histories. And we really did try to make the book particularly accessible. But yeah, different multimedia forms would be great as well.
Does Ray's book include Yellowjackets?
Yeah, he does mention the Yellowjackets. I don't think he has as many photos, but he does mention it. And Brian Harris's book, Arcadia book on Frankfurt, also has a lot of Yellowjackets photos too. And, you know, to be honest, as we did our research here at the Historical Society, and we saw how many programs were in excellent condition, talking about the players and sponsors and schedules, as well as the photos from, as I mentioned, Will S. Gibson, who had negatives very well preserved from every single game of the 1926 season. So I was able to look through most of them and pick out some of the best ones. But there is a very real chance of, in the future, doing a Yellowjackets version of these books too. I think there are enough existing resources to do it. So certainly something Andrew, as a local, will look into, and we'll talk to Brian as well. So, yeah, I think the Yellowjackets certainly deserve their own history book as well. That would be great.
They have one.
The spiral bound one.
Yeah.
That was a great resource as well. The newspaper clipping of just all the Yellowjackets. I had picked up a copy doing our research. I actually gave mine to Ray Diddy because he hadn't seen it before. So I'm going to pick one up here before I leave as well. That is the encyclopedia version of the Yellowjackets history. So that's a really great comprehensive history as well. So thanks. Did you put that together? Who put that together? No. Are they still here?
I think Howard Barnes did that, and Howard Barnes has passed.
Well, that was a great resource. Definitely keep that in print.
Yeah, I think that was originally
1986. Yep. So yeah, for anyone at home, come to the society, pick up the complete Yellowjackets history book. That additionally. So again, the programs, Gibson's photos, and the complete history together, you know, have the beginnings of the book. So we've already kind of talked about doing that and giving some of the proceeds here to the museum as well. So that's a great idea.
Remember the coverage up there at the clubhouse on Penn Street?
At the store?
I thought it was the house.
No, the on Penn Street, the house that
somebody in the past year bought the house and trying to restore it and do a little bit of yellow jacket theme type of thing that people could walk through. I probably haven't talked to that person in a couple of years. I've had to catch up with them simply.
Yeah, the woman was asking for a spell, and she got a lot.
Yeah, no, happy to connect yeah, the past year, definitely with the shutdown, it made it difficult to do some of the research, especially with the Library of Congress. We weren't able to get into there. It took them about 6 or 8 months to pull some photos for us, particularly those ones from Joe's last game, the Snowball Santa. So we really do want to get those in there, but it did make for a good project. From beginning to end, writing the book, I think we had the idea in November of last year, and it came out in print the beginning of September of this year. So about 10, 11 months of work on the book. Any other questions? Yes.
Let me get on that topic of the franchise swap between the Steelers and Eagles.
I thought you might, yeah, certainly. So, as we mentioned, there were the ownership groups, Lex Thompson, who was kind of this playboy millionaire, I believe he's from New York, also in the Army, and he bought the Pittsburgh franchise, right? And we had Burt Bell here in Philadelphia. Lex wanted to move the Pittsburgh franchise to Boston, but the owners said, no, we don't want you to do that. So basically what happened was they agreed to swap franchises because Lex Thompson wanted to be closer to New York, so he swapped with Pittsburgh, Burt Bell and Art Rooney going over to own now the Pittsburgh franchise, and Alexis Thompson owning the Eagles franchise. They moved players, equipment, pretty much everything except the name. They kept the names, they kept the history in the same spot, but they moved all the front office people and players. So this was, what year was this, 1938, 40?
I thought it was after the war.
Was it after the war?
Yeah, I thought it was after the war. I think it was 1940.
40? Okay, so right in the middle. Again, it was the beginning of the NFL. They were basically just trying to stay alive at this point. They had teams merging, folding for the seasons because of World War II. So they were in dire circumstances, and you can see a lot of rules being bent to keep things going during World War II. Matt Allego wrote the book on the Steagles, which is a great read if you're interested in the franchise swap. The Rooneys, who own the Steelers, Burt Bell, Alexis Thompson, and just the process behind drafting players and who was left, the 4-H players who didn't get drafted because they had things like a perforated drum or a broken leg at some point. Couldn't serve in World War II. So it was really dire straits at this point. So yeah, eventually, basically the Eagles that we know today were once the Steelers, and the Steelers were once the Eagles. And it was because of the friendship that Burt Bell had with Dan Rooney back in the day, and they agreed both for the swap and then later a couple years for the Steagles. So the Eagles and Steagles history are intertwined, no doubt about that. But yeah, anything else to add on that story, Ryan?
Well, doesn't that mean though that the Steelers are the descendants of Frankford?
Yeah, yes, you could, yeah.
That's the technicality I want to bring up.
Yeah.
Is with that swap, the franchise that the Yellowjackets used to hold, Frankford used to hold, is now residing in Pittsburgh.
Right, and but then you also have the question: is the Yellowjackets franchise the Eagles?
Yeah,
Right, because it was taken back by the NFL at some point. Burt Bell didn't buy the Yellowjackets. That sometimes is a misclaim out there. He didn't buy the Yellowjackets. He bought the rights to the Philadelphia team back from the NFL. So the Eagles don't have the Yellowjacket stats in their stat book. They did wear the uniforms That one time, what year was that?
2007.
2007, Ryan Dawkins was on the team. They sold a lot of those Yellow Jacket uniforms. Most people hated the colors, as I recall. I thought it was a nice change of pace, but panned in the fashion world, and we haven't seen them again, unfortunately. So the Steelers aren't wearing them either. So yeah, in that regard, the Yellow Jackets' history is maybe not continuous, but also one of the reasons you don't hear about it as much with the NFL anymore. Certainly when they go back and talk about the 26 championship or the 25 controversy. Also, that in 1926, as I mentioned, the Quakers of the AFL won that league. They never played the Yellow Jackets in a citywide kind of NFL, AFL game, but they did play the New York Giants, who finished 7th in the NFL. So the Quakers of the AFL played the Giants of the NFL, which some people refer to as the first Super Bowl back in 1926. Right? It's not the same AFL that merged. That one folded and had 2 more iterations before the Lamar Hunt AFL that we know today. But some people might claim that's the first Super Bowl as well. So interesting. By the way, the Quakers got trounced by the Giants, 49-0. So the 7th place NFL team certainly put the AFL winners to shame in that first Super Bowl. Any other questions? Things to discuss? Yes?
What surprised you the most when you were doing this research?
What surprised me the most? Like I said, the owners, just how ridiculous the stories were of them wasting money, spending money, just having a dysfunctional franchise, not treating the team as a professional organization, more just as a play toy. So particularly, and it was a long line. Alexis Thompson, Burke Bell, all kind of Playboy millionaire folks who ran the team. It was never this family-run organization, again, like the Rooneys, the Morrows, that are still around, the Hallises in Chicago, that are still owning the team today. It was always this kind of hand-off toy between rich people. And you saw that in the price of the franchise. Every time it got sold, it was usually for the highest record amount the past couple times. So Leonard Toast, Norman Brayman, certainly as owners, had amazing stories. Jerry Woolman's, like I said, rags to riches to rags story was more of a heartbreak because he seemed like a genuinely nice guy who just took a bath on the Hancock Center. So I thought his story and his biography reading was probably the most complex of the owners. The others were just kind of rich guys who happened to own the team and like to have fun. So I think the owners really are a story that you don't hear a lot. The players, of course, learning how good some of them were. Steve Van Buren, for instance, it's a name you hear, and he was a big part of the early championships. But he really was far and away a running back that was better than pretty much everyone in the NFL. So that was one that was kind of interesting, just to learn how good he was compared to the rest of them. And then he's from Honduras, too. Honduras-born football player, so very interesting as well. Andrew, what do you think? Any big surprises?
Just more of so how many firsts there were, because Philadelphia always seems like it's a city with a lot of firsts, and how Bucko Kilroy was basically invented the combine. There's a member of the Frankford Yellowjackets, I believe, that invented the field goal post, and another one invented the sleds that they use at the training camps, the pushing sleds. Burt Bell founded the NFL draft, and also I believe one of the first players, Davey O'Brien, he actually left the Eagles to become an FBI agent. So it's incredible to think how many people nowadays want to become football players, and that's their only job. And back then, they had to think about life after football. They had to juggle jobs at the time. And the first draft pick in Eagles history, Jay Burwinger, I believe his name was, he never even played football because he thought it was better to actually get an industrial job.
Yep, and the Steagles were the only NFL team at the time who required their players to hold outside jobs, factory, wartime jobs, in addition to playing football. And again, having their first winning season, so that made it even more amazing. So that was another very interesting book. So reading the books, doing the research was a lot of fun, meeting new people like Susan and Ed, and a lot of it wasn't in person, unfortunately, because of COVID, but now, hopefully, I can start to put some faces to names, and that's an interesting part as well. Okay. All right. Unless there's anything else, again, I want to thank everyone for coming up. John, any closing words? We're good?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you to everyone.
There's plenty of free stickers